Welcome to The Golden Shadow, the podcast about psychology, philosophy, myth, mysticism, and mystery. My name is Arran Rogerson.
And I'm Alyssa Polizzi.
Today, we're talking about dreams. We're all familiar with dreams. We all have dreams. Sometimes we remember them. Sometimes we don't. But it's a very interesting topic. It's very deep. It speaks to the whole realm of the unconscious as a gateway into the unconscious, as a way of illustrating what the unconscious can represent in our lives. And that's why it's a very interesting thing for us to discuss.
And complex.
Very complex.
We should note that we really don't understand dreams very well, but it's fun to explore, right?
Right. So we, as in just collectively, society does not understand dreams very well.
Yeah.
But we also, as Alyssa and I, don't really understand dreams very well either.
Yeah.
But
I think there's some sort of like kernels of truth in the patterns of diving in and trying to pull apart what's going on in the studies of other individuals. But at its core, I think if you truly believe that this might be part of some greater narrative of your own conscious, and that is a part of yourself that you're not totally aware of, aka belonging to the unconscious realm, then we can't totally understand it. But that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So dreams are interesting to talk about because everyone has a unique dream landscape.
Yeah.
You might even say dreamscape. I kind of like that word.
Yeah, it's called dreamscape.
But it's fun to talk about dreams because it becomes clear that the dreamscape that I have is different than the dreamscape that Alyssa has.
Mm-hmm.
And that my dreams, in many ways, reflect my personality and reflect my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there are characters that appear in my dreams. There are objects that appear in my dreams, items, weapons. There's settings. There's definitely a tone to dreams I have that I feel like reflect, in some sense, the way that I experience the world.
Yeah.
So you can glean from this notion that there is something accessing, something that is being accessed that is real when we dream,
right.
that is speaking to who we are in some way. And it's not as simple as writing it off as a bunch of random nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
It's also important, as we already said, it's important not to overread dreams or pretend as if they are predicting the future,
right?
Or pretend as if our dreams speak to something very concrete that we can truly understand precisely what it means.
Yeah.
As in, this dream about Edward means I'm going to marry Edward.
Right.
We need to be careful about that.
Yeah, I think that there's a tendency to want to read into those aspects, whether it's appearing in dreams or some other symbolic form. And I think that speaks to a desire to really want to understand oneself, what's really behind that phenomena when people have some sort of vivid dream that they might associate some sort of realm of possibility to, or they read like their local newspaper horoscope or whatever it is, we definitely recognize this pattern inside of ourselves. And I think it speaks to that deeper psychological need to understand the unknown. And we have to kind of approach it with a little bit more humbleness and openness and really kind of matching what we get from those experiences with what is real and what can be grounded.
Mm-hmm. Embrace the mystery.
Yeah.
Embrace the unknown, but also understand there's something to be learned.
Yeah.
Something that we can make some sense of, that we can utilize to perhaps help us navigate our confusing existence.
Yeah.
So, Alyssa, what is your dreamscape like?
My dreamscape, I feel that often my dreamscape has a lot of additions of the people that I know coming up in all of these different dynamic ways. Sometimes I have dreams where there's a whole host of individuals that I know from my friend group. And there's this huge dramatic scene that's playing out. And when I wake up and I really start to think about it, I realize that none of those people who showed up in my dream really actually were those friends in real life, which is to say, despite dreaming about them, I could see so much of myself in the version of this friend or that friend. And the whole narrative actually spoke to some greater dynamic going on inside of myself. So I find that the way that my consciousness really pulls from my life is through these very deep, meaningful connections that I have. Sometimes I feel like I dream of people in a way that it's difficult for me to feel like I can connect the relation to my own life. Like I feel like in some ways I'm just seeing some aspect of themselves playing out in my unconscious, and I wake up really kind of thinking about their life and their experience. And this just speaks to this really deep sort of humanistic, compassionate, empathetic element. I'm very person focused, and the people in my life are very meaningful, and their experiences, or just kind of like experiences of people in general, is something that is very prominent for me. And so a lot of what is going on in my dreamscape often has a lot to do with other people or their relation to me.
Right. So you're a very extroverted person.
Yeah.
You are concerned with other people.
Yeah.
You, just speaking from my personal experience, you orient yourself very much to take care of others, to see what other people need in group social situations. You do care about how people are feeling and whether or not they're enjoying yourselves. And so your dreamscape reflects this,
Yeah.
I think, in a way that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that you talk about the people that appear in your dream as not necessarily being the individuals.
Right.
That, like, literally the individuals. Well, of course not literally. They're not literally in your dream. But if you see a friend and the friend is Jim in the dream, it's not necessarily true that that's what the individual in the dream actually represents.
Right. Right.
That it's like almost a container for some aspect of your personality that you are projecting into this object of the dream.
Yeah. And I think why that happens is because who that person is to me, their personality traits, their characteristics, there's something about them that is representative of a part of myself. And so in some ways, when this mishmash of like associations begins, if I need to find a container for someone who's courageous and bold, I think, yes, Jim. I mean, I'm not thinking it, but some part of me is, right? And so that container of courage and boldness starts to manifest in my dreams as my friend Jim. And when I actually think about it later on, sort of reflecting and analyzing the dream, I could really start to see how he's kind of a mask for that part of myself. But it's easier, of course, to dream about other people rather than like 5 versions of yourself.
Right. And this, it's even more striking when, and I think this happens to everyone, when someone appears in your dream that you have not talked to or thought about in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And it might even be someone that does not play any major role in your life. It could be someone that you haven't spoken to for 10 years, that you went to college with maybe, and they just appear in your dream. It might be someone that you met yesterday, like at a sandwich shop or something, and like you don't even know them, and yet they're in your dream. And it's easy to be like, well, that's very strange. Like, what is this person doing in my dream? Maybe this person means something to me that's really important. Should I contact them, etc.? But it's important to understand what you're describing is that someone from your past, even someone you didn't really know very well, might represent in your mind innocence, or someone who is kind of a bystander or an observer, or your unconscious wants to fill these containers with the materials that are there in your mind somewhere.
Yeah, if we hearken back to that conversation of the conscious and unconscious dynamic, we have to recognize that some part of us is taking in way more information than we realize. Like our consciousness really has a set of limitations. It can't overload the mainframe, taking in like how this person kind of looked this way and the tone of voice of that person. It hones in on certain things, but maybe something about that bystander, the way that they talked, the interactions that you somewhat kind of notice between them and the deli clerk, put them in the unconscious realm as someone who's open and kind and caring. And then suddenly they emerge in the dream as that kind of figure. Some part of you picked up that pattern and sort of placed it into that repository of the unconscious.
Yeah, the repository. And it really speaks to this idea that each of us has a personal mythology.
Yes.
And that there are that our experience, the way that we actually interact with the world, the language of our experience is a narrative.
Yeah.
Which is why we find stories in movies and even video games, right? We find these sort of narrative arcs to be compelling because it's actually the way that we relate to the world in some regards. So we develop our own personal mythologies where our life is a story. The unconscious is organizing it that way in some sense. And there are players in your life, for instance, that might represent various motifs that we find in mythology.
Yeah.
Like you might have a friend that you consider to be really trustworthy and powerful and courageous and charismatic, and there's a mythology about them that you have. They're a hero in some sense, and so you might dream some strange narrative in your dream where this person is doing something that is strangely mythologically heroic.
Right.
And that might just mean like leading a group of your friends to climb over a mountain or something like that.
Yeah. In that same vein, we can also look at the collective mythologies that can come up in this space as well. Because if we're dealing with the archetypal realm and our connection to that space of our existence, you might also have then the emergence of these deeper archetypal themes that take the container of the courageous hero, but this time you're like actually dreaming of like Hercules or maybe like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings or something. Like maybe it's not your friend Jim, but it's actually being held by this more collective container. And that's really interesting, something to take note of, something to even expand upon if these more collective themes show up in the dreamscape that don't seem as personal as someone you knew.
Right. And that speaks to the sort of archetypal nature of of our psychology.
Yeah.
The archetypes play a role in shaping the way that we interact with the information that we encounter, but that collectively that's happening. So a lot of the really popular fiction we have, or some of the fiction that's been retained for generations, is very archetypal and has provided a pre-filled container for you.
Yeah, definitely.
In some regard, and that's what Aragorn or Hercules might represent. So yeah, there's a lot going on here with dreams. A lot of meat to chew on, you might say. Personally, for my dreamscape, just in reflection to Alyssa's, I would say also reflects my personality a lot, and my dreams are very often me wandering alone in fantastical, not always adventure-like scenarios, but often like wandering through the wilderness and meeting people along the way and meeting people that I know in real life.
Yeah.
And searching for things. I have a lot of dreams where there's a conflict that I'm in the middle of, like war or being chased, things like that. So my dreams feel very action packed sometimes.
Yeah.
But the motif of loneliness and space is a common thing for me, and I think that reflects my personality and my experience, which is like in many ways I do process the world as someone who is pretty alone, pretty much an outsider a lot of the time.
But a lot of these adventures are also being fueled by some sort of like heroic nature. Like if you are adventuring,
Yeah.
are you often leading a pack or
Right,
doing
right.
something for the greater good?
Yeah, they're not sad, you
Yeah.
know, and that's important. I guess it sounds pretty sad when I describe it, but that's an important thing is that like these don't feel like dreams where I'm just like so lonely and just
Right.
like crawling around like in like the tundra just by myself. It's just the way the tone of my dreams are very much wandering,
Yeah.
and there's power in it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I have something else that I think is very interesting in my dreams is I have recurring objects. There's a camping knife,
Okay.
and I think I've mentioned this to you before.
Yeah.
But there's a camping knife that I've had for 10 years now that for some reason was picked up by my unconscious as a very I don't know. I don't want to say useful, but this appears in my dreams often
Yeah.
because it's symbolic and it's available, and I often have this knife on me, and it's like to me clearly represents some sort of item of power,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a tool, something that has a lot of utility, or it might symbolize something else. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting thing to note about what's happening in one's dreamscape and what are the patterns that you're seeing, and then how does that really speak to some deeper connection that you have, or like why is it a knife and not a gun, or a knife and not a flamethrower or something like that? Like how does that actually speak to your psychology?
Yeah.
Because you laugh at flamethrower, but for some people
Well, I
they
do
might.
own a flamethrower, but it doesn't appear in my dreams for some reason.
It doesn't make the cut.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like a sort of recurring symbolic power form in my dreams is usually something that's way more like magical in nature. Like actually the dream that I had last night, things were getting really intense and I started weaving this like big golden magic energy around me. It was almost doing like this prayer or like incantation,
Yeah.
which I think for you, you can probably say like, yep, that sounds like Alyssa. Like just very magical, fantastical, kind of sorceress nature.
Right. That's the character that you choose, that you
Right.
identify with, and
Yeah.
this is another game that we play often is thinking about which character would you be
Right.
in this story or this movie,
Yeah.
or even if you're choosing a character in like a game, Dungeons and Dragons or a video game, for instance. It's
Yeah.
like you gravitate towards a sorceress,
Yeah,
summoner
usually.
type character.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the way that you see yourself,
Right.
or what kind of role you envision yourself playing in the world and in group situations, which is one who possesses great power
Yeah.
in a way that is not quite as concrete or as tangible.
Right. It's not super grounded, right?
Right. There is kind of this notion
It's
of
not
like,
realistic.
right, but the like the tormented sorceress who like has so much power, but like she doesn't know how to control it, and part of her journey is like learning how to control her power,
Right.
which I think speaks to your experience in
Right.
life, and by contrast is like the way I see myself mythologically as a
Yeah.
character. If I choose a character, is I like the character that has a sword.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's what I'm most drawn to. I find like using a bow to be interesting also,
Right,
kind of like
right.
the elven like Legolas character, but mostly just like the guy who has a sword, and like that's how I identify. It's like I like the idea of like being a powerful being
Right.
that has a sword.
It's a simple heroism.
Yeah, it is simple, and then like that's the knife in my dreams.
Yeah,
I
right.
think is in some sense is like it's just like this simple, straightforward
Yeah.
power that's readily available to me. I carry around with me, and I have it at all times. And I don't know, that it speaks to something that's some way of orienting myself towards the world.
Yeah. And I think that's what's really happening in this place in our consciousness, where we're sort of pulling from all of these scattered associations of people we know, our own sort of personal mythology, how we view ourselves, who we saw yesterday or last week, things that are sort of building and forming inside of ourselves. And all of that then plays out in this really just otherworldly landscape at night. And it's really interesting, actually, to really start to dive in and understand what that means for oneself.
So just on a more psychological level,
Sure.
how might we actually try to define like dreams? Like what's really happening on a more sciencey type level, let's say, or we have this notion of what dreams are. Everyone's kind of familiar with the dream experience because they have dreams. What's the unconscious really doing? And how can we interpret what the unconscious is doing? Like, why dream at all? Like,
Right.
why have any dreams?
Yeah. I think it seems like a very necessary function. And we're not the only animals, air quotations, that dream, right?
Right.
Like
Sure.
we watch dogs.
Right. Go on YouTube and look up sleepwalking dog.
So cute, or they're just like running in their sleep. There's some sort of function that's happening for us during this period of rest that seems necessary to our minds continuing to function in a balanced way. So it certainly seems to bring a sense of processing. I often wake up feeling that way sometimes after a lot of things have been going on.
Yeah.
Emotional processing, just brain dynamics sort of firing off and associations pulling here and there. And yet I
Right.
can kind of wake up and there's a sense of that something was kind of going on in some way. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit more at rest and more at ease.
Yeah.
So I think partly there's some sort of regulation happening.
Right. The brain is, well, the body is at work processing, regenerating, healing. I mean, when we sleep, it's not just laying down.
Right.
Is how you regain your energy. It's like
Right.
the actual mode
Yeah.
of sleep is a state that the body enters in and says, okay, everyone, it's time to like regenerate. It's time to heal. It's time to get back to work. And that's interesting. I mean, part of the aspect when we think of processing as being what happens when we dream, that's part of it and makes sense. But there's also this sort of this notion of like, why are the dreams not about what happened
Right.
today?
Right.
Like if they were just processing, wouldn't they
Right.
just be processing what happened?
Yeah.
And
It's not just that.
it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And so the dreamscape is being constructed from all these different pools of material inside of you.
Yeah.
And there's, I think another notion we have with dreams is that something is just playing, like a movie is being constructed while the brain is working on their stuff.
Yeah.
So redirecting whatever ego consciousness is towards a different place while the brain is often in the back end regenerating things.
Right.
Is some notion. I know in that movie like Inside Out, the Pixar movie, that's what dreams are in the movie. Is like they just have people who are like filming filming
Right.
a little scene
Yeah.
to distract the
Yes,
sleeper in some sense.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon approach to understanding dreams. And I think there's truth to that. I really do. I don't think that every dream we have like bits and pieces that we remember holds a lot of insight. I think in some ways, like there are things probably happening in that space that just need, to be put on tracks and let it happen because
Right.
other stuff is happening. So we have to be open to all of those realms of
Right.
possibility.
Right. And the fact, I think the fact that we can have dreams, and this is a longer discussion that we're probably not going to get into, but the fact that we can have bad dreams, we can have terrifying dreams,
Yes.
the fact that dreams can do something that makes us wake up, like screaming.
Yeah.
If it was just processing the events of yesterday,
Yeah.
or if it was just playing a movie while you sleep, it's like, well, why this terror?
Yeah.
What's the point of that?
Right.
And I think that alludes to this idea that there's material that is being pulled up by the dream weaver, you might say, to construct the dream, and it's coming in and out of different sources of material, and that it might cross an area of your psyche that is painful,
Yeah.
or that is a traumatized area that you're
Right.
closed off to.
Yeah.
Some place that you're really, really suppressing when you're
Right.
awake.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the dream weaver, let's say, wanders into that area
Yeah.
and pulls upon something that you actually are not ready to let into consciousness.
Right. And that's where I think the interesting idea behind the compensatory nature of dreams comes in, where it's like, maybe you should start acknowledging some of this repressed trauma
right.
that you have. And as that starts to emerge, it's like, like so overwhelming, even in the dreamscape, that it can morph into this like nightmarish, scary, violent, intense dream. But what's interesting, that I think for many people, that often when they work even with intense, scary, nightmarish dreams, that what felt too overwhelming actually doesn't end up being as scary or bad when the individual maybe starts to face what's actually in the dream itself, whether that's in the conscious world or a shift in the actual dream, where one starts to face like the scary monster that's running towards them, or what have you.
So where's the gold in this shadow?
AKA, how can we do some shadow work around dreams, right?
How can we ground this discussion in real-world application?
It's a good question. So let's discuss it.
Time for shadow work.
Time for shadow work, yes. So if we're approaching dreams in this framework of our shadow, we acknowledge that we're interacting with a space that we just don't know very well. We might have a sense of it. We might kind of have some ideas here and there, but we have to humbly begin this journey recognizing that we have a lot to learn.
Right. I mean, even from the get-go, most of us don't really remember our dreams very well.
Yeah,
So
step one.
Step one is like, you don't remember your dreams.
Yeah.
You probably do when you first wake up.
Yeah.
You might have like a small portion of time,
Yeah.
maybe even like less than a minute,
Yeah.
where like you might remember something
Yes.
that you dreamed about.
Yes.
And that is the time to write it down.
Yeah, that's like tip number one. Write it down as soon as possible and try not to move around too much. Like don't get up and, because you put your dream notebook in the other room, keep it close by. Try not to move your body around too much. You're trying to kind of keep yourself in that space of sort of awakening into consciousness and holding on to those images or those feelings that you woke up with.
Right. So keeping a dream journal is what we're talking about.
Yes.
Beginning to track your dreams
Yes.
in some way.
Yeah.
So how might we get started on that?
Yes, well, it's really up to the individual to decide what feels natural to them. Some people really do enjoy writing them by hand, so they'll have a physical notebook nearby. You can use your phone, which usually everyone has close to their bed, so you can take a voice memo if that's easier for you, or you can pull up, a writing app or something like that and begin to note the dreams and all the dynamics that you remember. Or, write it on your computer if that's close by, if you have a laptop.
Yeah, personally, I have an iPhone, and there is a notes app on your iPhone built in.
Right.
You can also get plenty of free apps
Yep.
for note taking, but I have my notes app connected to all my devices.
Right.
I wake up, I have a dream, I write it in the notes. I try to do it quickly, and usually I just leave a date. And that's how I keep track of it.
Yep.
And then I have a larger journal on
Yes.
a computer that I keep it in with all these dates, with all these dreams.
Yeah, think about how you want to file things, because it's helpful to be able to go back to this, to these recordings or to your entries and actually reflect back upon dreams that you've been having, and being able to date them and know when they happened, what month, what year, what time of your life was that dream emerging, can help you understand the greater narrative of your dreamscape and what's happening for you. And I think that's what kind of takes me into like tip number 2 is like, as you begin to actually record your dreams, it's time to start understanding the greater picture of what's evolving here. And by doing this, by writing down your dreams every day and not just kind of writing it and then forgetting and doing nothing with it, starting to really look for patterns, recurring motifs, characters, people who are coming up, environments, places. You're really trying to start creating a vocabulary and a grammar for your dream.
Right. So keeping track of your own personal mythology, as
Mm-hmm.
we alluded to earlier, your own personal repository
Right.
of dream objects, you might say, whether that's people or items
Mm-hmm.
or settings
Yeah.
or even more rare things like music
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
or colors
Yes.
or words people say. Like,
Sure.
who knows?
Sure.
There's always,
Yes.
it's unlimited what you
That's
might
it.
appear in your
It's a
dream.
very interesting point to bring up because I think, I don't know, it's hard to know for sure. I haven't like talked to a ton of people, but I think for the most part, people wake up with a sense of what happened in the dream and interactions, but there's not often words that you really remember. But sometimes you wake up and there is a statement that is stuck with you. And that's very important. Write that down. Or maybe, as you said, it's like a piece of music. If you're a musician, especially, sometimes we'll dream about music itself, like
Right.
a song, lyrics, things like that.
Right. I actually, this is probably strange, but like I'm a pretty serious musician and have been for for my entire adult life. But I often have dreams where I write songs
Yeah.
in my dreams.
Yeah.
Like there was a song in my dream and it's not a real song. I just wrote it in my dream
Yeah.
and I actually get up and I write and record the song down.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's my dream song. That's
Right.
weird. And that can be interesting
Yeah.
as to what that means.
Yeah. It's important to mark down those specific events and work with them then. So we're tracking patterns. We're looking to see what the general like vocabulary and the symbology, the imagery that's really being drawn from your unconscious. And when you start to understand that and see those patterns, you can also track and notice changes in them. So if one has this recurring dream motif of being chased and maybe who's chasing you or what entity, and the setting is always different, but there's this sense of that movement of the need to get away, that something's coming for you, but suddenly things start to shift. You might start to look at other areas of your life and think, what is this aligned to? You know, is something going on in your conscious life where you're making a shift in your attitude? Is some element of you transforming? Is that now being reflected in your dreamscape? You only really get that by putting in the work of the somewhat daily dream tracking.
Right. So a good place to start might be you have a dream, you wake up, you write it down immediately if you can, or record it.
Yeah.
Voice memo if that's easier for you, and a date, and then you can title your dream.
Yes.
If you have a certain sort of experience in the dream, you can give it a title.
Sure.
A certain tone or feeling, you could write that down.
Yes.
People that appeared in your dream,
Yes.
objects, whatever, you can put all those things at the top of this little note you're writing, this little journal entry at the top, in parentheses, 2/15, 2020, title, my nightmarish van trip. And then in parentheses, Joe, Bessie, and Jackson were in the dream. Scary. But a weird twist at the end,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then below that, you can actually write a more detailed description of what happened,
Yeah.
like scene by scene,
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah.
But being able to go through your dreams and just see these motifs at the top
Yes.
is a good way to track it and to begin to develop you might even say like a system or
Yeah.
science
Right.
of your own dreams.
Yes. I think it's not super common to give a title to the dream, but I think that it's actually a pretty interesting practice that you might find pretty difficult initially, but trying to conceptualize it or pull from something with inside of yourself, the main overarching aspect actually might speak to something going on in the dream that you didn't realize. So it's like the act of analyzing and the act of introspection that actually often reveals further associations, insights, and that's kind of the main work around doing dream analysis. It's not just to track it for the sake of tracking it and you just sort of forget. You're trying to draw things outside of yourself and become more aware, become more conscious, have that dialogue between you and yourself, and really understand how it reflects to what's happening in your life right now. That's a big, important question. What's going on? What happened in the last few days? What kind of inner dynamic is this speaking to? How does this relate to my life and what I'm experiencing?
Yeah, and this is true for just regular journaling, but if you externalize these things, the more that you take the contents of your unconscious or of your conscious, whatever, the more you externalize things by writing them down, journaling, putting them on a piece of paper, the more you can look at them objectively, the more you can bring things into conscious awareness by systematically taking a look at them. That's why journaling is useful. And for dream journaling, the more you can bring this outside of you onto paper,
Right.
the more you bring it into consciousness.
Yes.
And you begin to recognize patterns that you never would have
Yes.
just by thinking about
Yeah.
your dream and then just forgetting about it.
Yeah. That's that core of shadow work, the stuff that we're just not paying attention to for whatever reason,
Right.
maybe we don't have the time, maybe we don't want to look, but it's these types of actions that really can apply to many things outside of dream work that really allow us to start growing in awareness of ourself and in our life.
So how else can we use these dreams? Let's say once we've written them down, what other applications might be useful?
I think it's important to explore a couple of different realms once you have the dream, which is, what does it mean to you? How is it speaking to those inner dynamics? And what can you do to actually follow up upon reflecting on these things? Especially if the dream seems to speaking to something inside of yourself that's kind of trying to emerge, some part of yourself that you need to process. It's time to sort of continue that externalization process and maybe do some further meditation on the dream images. You can explore the technique of active imagination,
Right.
which often uses some sort of aspect of a dream, whether that's an image or a character or some feeling tone, and beginning there and exploring it in a more active sort of meditative style. And active imagination can take the form of a sitting meditation where you sort of expand that imagery in your mind and sort of follow it, but it also can be through painting, drawing, music, dancing, things like that. You're just sort of trying to embody that imagery and that unconscious dynamic more and seeing how it grows.
Right, and the dream can serve as a bit of an access point to the unconscious realm that you can actually anchor onto in some regard and make these connections to the unconscious that otherwise would be hidden from you. And that's why it can be used, I think, for a lot of therapeutic applications. And if you have a therapist, even, you can bring up your dreams and talk to them.
That's what I was going to say. Especially, you don't have to be working with like a Jungian analyst specifically to do dream work. The mind of the therapist and how they know you can also be a helpful place to really take the dream content into the therapeutic relationship and explore it, because they know parts of you already that that you're trying to work on and that you're trying to realize. And that can be also said for people that you know in your life, your close friends and family. Discussing your dreams with them can be helpful because they might offer an interesting insight that you hadn't considered. At the same time, you are your own creator of the dream space. Kind of always following what feels true to you is important, not letting someone else dictate it, or not pulling up the old dream symbolism book and being like, I dreamt of a rose and that means that. Okay, got it, figured out. Are we supposed to
Shadow work managed.
Okay, I wasn't sure. We were stuck there.
And now it's time to answer some questions from our audience. Why do I always dream of pain being inflicted on me? Death. Sometimes it's really graphic.
Well, it makes me think initially about shadow content that feels painful, difficult, even traumatic in nature. Maybe carries this feeling tone experience of badness, scary, stay away. And when we think about that unconscious content holding things inside of ourselves that we're not paying attention to, that might be manifesting in the dreamscape as this violent, killing dynamic that's playing out for you.
Could be something perhaps that you were suppressing quite a bit, and it's sort of trying to break free. there might be a undercurrent of anxiety in your life that you're
Yeah.
not in touch with. And
Yeah.
so it manifests in the only way that it can, which is
Yeah.
in the dream world.
Yeah. An interesting sort of pattern that a lot of the Jungian analysts saw in dreams was that this sort of archetypal playing field of violent nature cropping up in dreams was associated a lot with people with a lot of intense trauma in their life, and that in the dreamscape, this sort of archetypal system was ignited where you would have, especially if someone needs to work on their trauma or are beginning to work on it, that you might see these very violent characters appearing, which are sort of manifestations of that grief or that traumatic element.
Something that you should pay attention to, probably,
Yeah.
if this is happening to you.
Yeah, definitely.
And pursue some kind of therapy, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
As everyone always should. Everyone should pursue therapy.
Yeah, therapy's great.
Okay. Do you think dreams mostly come from the pineal gland releasing slight amounts of DMT?
I feel like my reaction to this is I'm not even sure if there's any scientific proof behind this claim, although it feels like it's kind of like a general idea or maybe even a certain hypothesis that some people are throwing around.
Yeah, I can understand people trying DMT
Right.
and thinking this is kind of like dreams.
Right.
And I understand the desire to make a connection.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any science behind this.
Right.
I kind of assume there's not.
Feels like an
honestly,
urban legend in a way.
But for people who don't know anything about DMT, it is an incredibly powerful psychedelic
Yeah.
drug that I think recently has become available and accessible.
More
in
accessible.
urban areas.
Yeah.
It's a different form of it is ayahuasca. Is that correct? It's like a different way of interacting with the DMT compound.
It
It's
may
like
be.
shamanic journeying traditionally.
Yeah. They might be related. I don't know specifically if the compound in ayahuasca is DMT.
I guess we should have done some research first. But DMT does result in a very psychedelic experience where you do experience things like ego death and like leaving your body. And I do think that anytime that we are doing anything that involves ego death, you might say, and I think that includes going to sleep at night, in some sense, consciousness is dissolving or it's entering a different mode of operation in which it's not constructing a waking reality, and therefore the unconscious is coming up to the surface and constructing reality.
Yeah.
That's happening in DMT. It's happening in dreams. The unconscious is very amorphous and mysterious and manifests in all these interesting ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that when you're dreaming, you're on DMT or vice versa.
Right.
Okay. Dreams that we're going to analyze very quickly, because these are short dreams that people have written in. A volcano erupts and destroys cars and people as I run into a hotel of chaos and deceit.
This is a really intense sounding dream.
Yes, I wonder if that really is all there was to it.
I'm sure there was more, which shows you the limitation in dream analysis when we don't have further insights into
Right.
what's going on and what was your experience. Like, were you running? Were you part of like the chaos? All of those details actually give you the deeper narrative of what's really happening. But in general, if we look at this idea of a volcano, which is this deeply chaotic and destructive force, it certainly represents something in the consciousness of an individual.
Sure.
Where something is being totally leveled out. You know, if a city is being overrun with lava and there's destruction everywhere, there's really a feeling that things are falling down. Things are being sort of the structure, the framework of whatever is going on is
Right.
being pulled down and just completely leveled out. So
Yes.
this dynamic is something that I would want the dreamer to explore in their own life.
Definitely. Very, very important to have context. We are analyzing dreams without context. Obviously, we are doing that, but it's important to understand that you can't really analyze dreams very effectively if you don't understand the context.
Yeah.
But a volcano, it's apocalyptic, end of times,
Right.
some more even overall notion of just everything collapsing and there's nowhere to go. The only place to go is a hotel of chaos and deceit, which
Yeah.
means that that's probably not a place of refuge either.
No.
But it might imply that you have an underlying sense of anxiety and needing to find shelter in a safe space, and you can't find it.
Yeah, you can't find it.
And that sounds like a pretty awful dream,
Yeah.
even though that's not necessarily implied by
Right.
what they wrote.
Right.
Again, deep anxiety, the unconscious, in some sense, is coming up to say there's a lot of anxiety in here. There's a lot of things that are not being processed. Perhaps this individual is suppressing a lot of conflict.
Yeah, or maybe
difficulty
they're in the
life.
process of tearing down a lot
Yeah.
in their life.
Definitely
and you
possible.
need to kind of bring that like destructive force of just like, okay, some things really need like the bulldozer and the wrecking ball. And that might be an approach that's actually needed in a situation. So another possibility. Next dream. Last night I dreamt I saw a cockroach in my car. I was sitting in the front seat and there was a dead cockroach next to me. 2 of them were running at the dashboard. I feel worried. I'm afraid that cockroaches can breed in my car.
Okay, well, those are very archetypal images. The cockroach is something that in the dream won't go away or is returning despite being squashed or returning despite being cleaned out. I mean, that's how cockroaches behave in real life. They're very difficult to get rid of.
Right.
We do find them to be disgusting in some sense. They represent some sense of something being unclean, something rotting. Anyways, so being stuck in a car, claustrophobic, trapped in a closed area that's unclean, unsafe, gross, and these problems that you were trying to resolve keep coming back.
And I find that the emergence of cars in dreams, at least personally, anecdotally, always speaks a lot to like this container of myself. I feel like when I dream of my car, or I'm looking for my car, and I think the individual who wrote in is like she's worried that the cockroach is going to be able to breed in her car. So it's like this is a symbolic form of your own psychology, your own experience, your own life. That these things that really don't belong, that you feel some sort of disgust towards, are emerging despite your efforts to stomp them out.
Do you have a question for us? Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Is there a topic you'd like us to cover?
We want to hear from you. Contact us through the submission form, which can be found at our Instagram page at Golden Shadow Podcast. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can find the link in the description down below.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. These podcasts are only possible with the support of viewers like you.